there guys, welcome back to another reaction video. Today we're checking out a big discovery dive of The Strokes. Before we get into today's video, I'd like to give a big shout out to Patreon and Amoroy for the suggestion. Without further ado guys, let's get to it.
Welcome back to the Deep Discog Dive. Sorry, it's an old piece from my last apartment. You know, it's nice to be reminded of where you started out in life versus where you are now. For instance, I used to spout strong opinions about Crazy Frog on the internet. I mean, I still do that, but now my hair's longer. It might even be nice to go back and revisit places and things that I hold near and dear to my heart. I would go back and visit my old apartment, but considering that's... I'll do the next best thing. Today, we're talking about The Strokes. Let's dive in.
Like a son. I adored you like a son!
New York City! In the early 1990s. We start at the Dwight School, where two childhood friends, Julian Casablancas and Nikolai Fraiture, attended. While there, Julian also met Nick Valenci and Fabrizio Moretti. Before he could write the hit song Business Dog, however, Julian was sent by his parents to boarding school in Switzerland. This is where he met Albert Hammond Jr., and when Albert later moved to NYC, the two dudes got an apartment together. Once Albert was introduced to Julian's other friends, the quintet decided to start a band. They settled on The Strokes as a name in late 1998, solely because no one hated it.
Fair enough.
The Strokes started out playing clubs throughout Manhattan's Lower East Side. Look at how much energy Julian has. That pixelated blob can cut a rug. Buzz began to grow around them. In fact, the manager of one of the venues they played, Ryan Gentles, was so impressed that he quit to be the band's manager. However, that buzz was limited to their live shows, and since they had no recordings, labels were quick to reject them. In October 2000, the band set up shop in the Transporter Raum with producer Gordon Raphael, the intent being to record these songs with the full band in one room, in one take. The Strokes made their first mark on the public in January 2001 with the Modern Age EP, featuring early versions of the songs The Modern Age, Last Night, and Barely Legal. Each of these songs would be re-recorded for their debut album, but it's still very much worth hearing them in this premature state. The tempos are faster, the lyrics are slightly different, and the production is gloriously chaotic. As a demonstration of pure energy, the Modern Age EP is perfect. Thanks to Ryan's connection to the founder of Rough Trade Records, the EP was released and received very well in the UK, particularly by the music magazine NME, who showered the Strokes with every ounce of praise possible. You see, rock music was in this weird limbo state. There was Limp Bizkit, there was Travis, other rock bands too, I'm sure. So perhaps NME and those other publications were just dying to talk about something different. For the love of God, like these Yankees! Upon their return to the US after a tour in the UK, they were greeted with gambling. A massive bidding war ensued off the strength of their live shows and the EP's success. Every label under the sun threw their hat into the ring to get these messy-haired New York boys on their team. The band eventually signed a 5-album deal to RCA. Why them? Because they were the only label that was fine with the band not wanting to do music videos. Recording sessions began soon after the signing, with Pixies and Foo Fighters producer Gil Norton on deck. However, those sessions turned fruitless, and the resulting material was deemed too clean and pretentious. Instead, they brought back in Gordon Raphael to produce. In October 2001, The Strokes released Is This It? You know how when you listen to an album, you listen to an album? Let me finish. I mean, you pull it up on your preferred listening medium, you begin with the first song, and you listen in sequential order until the last song. Well, Young Mike was on another plane. I digested Is This It song by song over the course of 2 years. Even to this day, I think of this album less like a full package and more like a greatest hits. It certainly helps that, in terms of quality, this is basically a greatest hits masquerading as a debut album. Let me make it clear, Is This It is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's one of those records that makes up the core foundation of my musical taste. Every song on here is Julian's handiwork, and I struggle to think of a better first impression of someone's songwriting chops. Plus, his lyrics are defined enough to establish clear emotions and situations, but vague enough to allow anyone to insert themselves. The opening title track is a perfect example. The blasé, deflated lyrics, and the interlocking combo of Julian's melody, the guitar, and the bass part. Nice. It's like that old Quincy Jones quote, all three of them are hooks on their own. I still get chills from the pre-chorus on Barely Legal, especially the way Julian sings this last line. It still amazes me that Hard to Explain doesn't use a drum machine. It's Fab's drumming, but chopped and stitched together by Gordon. It also shows that perfect interaction between melody and harmony that's in all of the best Strokes songs. Listen to the way Julian enters on the verse. That's Julian singing an F sharp, the lead guitar playing a G natural, all on top of an A minor chord. Not only are Julian and the guitar rubbing right up next to each other, but that F sharp and the C inside the A minor chord create a tritone, aka the most dissonant interval. What the hell are you guys all doing? Last Night used to get flack for sounding similar to Tom Petty's American Girl.
Yeah, I can.
To that I say, okay, American Girl is a great song. Last Night is a great song. It may have similarities, but the Strokes do a wonderful job taking the sounds of the past and tweaking them just enough to feel fresh and new. New York City Cops is a fan favorite, flawless in its structure. The interplay between the band on the verses, the way the bridge has that bouncy feel thanks to the guitars, and that glorious chorus. Julian, you sound so good on the track. Oh, he's bashful. Now you might be saying, Mike, I've listened to Is This It on CD or on streaming before, and I don't remember New York City Cops being on the track list. And that's because it isn't on the version Americans got. Except, if you were to buy the album on vinyl in the US, New York City Cops is on there. Why is that? Well, the CD released in America in October, but the vinyl released a month earlier. It released in September 2001. It released on September 11th, 2001. The album, with New York City Cops included, had already been out in Australia and the UK for months, but because of 9/11, the American CD release was pushed back, and New York City Cops was replaced with When It Started. A totally acceptable substitution. That said, New York City Cops isn't some lost track. It's readily available to listen to these days, whether on streaming or the US vinyl. Or you can be like me and get the UK CD imported. I thought this was a knee for so long. Is This It is a classic. There's no other way to put it. A younger me could have ranted about how much I love these songs for hours on end, and present me still could. The two wolves inside of me have moppy hair and denim jackets, and they're living their best lives.
Last Night, I just listened to that one.
Is This It was welcomed in the same way that a giant boat is welcomed by an island castaway. At least it was in the UK. Sales there were stellar, but the US reception was a bit more muted. But regardless of location, those who did check out the record absolutely fell in love with it. Every rock band that saw success over the next 10 years, especially the ones based in New York City, owes something to Is This It. Even if it wasn't a direct influence, those bands were able to walk through a door that Is This It flung open. 2002 saw the Strokes taking the mother of all victory laps, with tours and press up the wazoo. I used to watch on loop this performance of Take It or Leave It on Letterman. I love the bit towards the end where Julian and walks off stage. I've seen this dozens of times, I know how it ends, and yet I'm always a little unsure if he'll actually come back. If I had to pick one full live show from this time to check out, it's their MTV $2 bill concert. It's got a near perfect set list, the performances are excellent, Cody Chestnut goes up during Last Night and does this. Also worth checking out is In Transit, a mini documentary about the Strokes touring England in 2002. Nothing super produced, it's just the guys filming and goofing around. Nikolai brutally assaults Albert in an airport, everybody's happy. Sessions for their sophomore album kicked off with Nigel Godrich of Radiohead fame. However, Nigel soon left, and Gordon was once again brought back into the fray. Nothing from the sessions with Nigel has ever been leaked, unfortunately. Could you imagine how sick a Strokes album produced like The Bends would be? Super sick. In October 2003, the scene was lit up by Room on Fire. Once again, Julian was the sole songwriting force, though some eyewitnesses noticed that the other bandmates were starting to voice their own suggestions more often. Reptilia was my first ever introduction to the Strokes, and yes, it was from the co-op campaign in Guitar Hero 3. If there is only one song you check out by this band, please make it Reptilia. Everything to love about the Strokes is somewhere in this song, and it is still immaculately put together after all these years. Also, quick shout out to Reptilia's B-side, Modern Girls and Old-Fashioned Men, featuring Regina Spektor. Gordon Raphael also worked on her major label debut, and she fits in very well with the Strokes. Lead single 1251 features some creative guitar work on the hook. For the longest time, I thought it was a synth. Meet Me in the Bathroom always felt to me like the spiritual successor to Hard to Explain, especially when everything except the guitars drops out. It also inspired the name of a book about this whole NYC rock scene. I wish I could speak on its quality, but it's been on my shelf for years and I have not touched it. Under Control and I Can't Win are two songs that took their sweet-ass time growing on me. Nowadays, I love how tender and comforting Under Control is compared to the rest of the band's work, and I Can't Win, I just needed to hear Julian yell this part enough times to fall in love with it. The guitar hook on The End Has No End always perks my ear up because it sounds almost exactly like the one from Sweet Child of Mine.
Oh, yeah.
It also has a music video with young Mila Kunis, Eva Mendes, and their manager Ryan Gentles. The only two songs I don't click with as much are Automatic Stop and The Way It Is, though I will acknowledge, for Automatic it's because I grew up thinking the downbeat was where the guitar played, but the guitar is actually syncopated. So now every time I listen, I'm just reminded of my failures. There are some folks out there who would say Room on Fire is better than Is This It? Me? Absolutely not. The emotional connection I have to Is This It is just too strong. I will never not be blinded by nostalgia. But the fact that we can even have that conversation is one hell of a sign of Room on Fire's quality. Room on Fire is considered a fantastic album on par with Is This It? These days. In 2003, however, its reception was a bit shakier. Many thought it was just Is This It Again, and it only raked in half the sales that Is This It did. It certainly didn't help that the other bands who walked through the door the Strokes opened were experiencing way more success. The White Stripes, Franz Ferdinand, The Killers, bands that were outright inspired by the Strokes were surpassing them in sales, like vocal Strokes fan Alex Turner and his band Arctic Monkeys. He just wanted to be one of the Strokes. Now look at the mess you made him make. And heck, even pop music was taking cues from the Strokes and creating big hits. Take Since You've Been Gone, Kelly Clarkson's star-making single after American Idol. There's a quote from its producer saying that it was influenced by the Strokes, but how they took it where they wanted a Strokes song to go. So for their next album, the Strokes wanted to go big. They wanted arenas. They wanted the kind of success enjoyed by the Foo Fighters. That level of seriousness overflowed into their personal lives. Between Room on Fire and their third album, everyone either started long-term relationships, got engaged, or got married. Julian even stopped drinking to help focus more on his songwriting and to be more effective communicating to the band. Speaking of which, this new album would be the first to feature input from the rest of the band. The most major change in the studio, though, was bringing in David Kahn to help produce and also to help communicate their bigger sonic aspirations to Gordon. While he and Gordon started out as co-producers, Gordon eventually left due to breakdowns in communication. So why did the Strokes want David? Well, David had records with the Bangles and the Outfield under his belt. He also worked on Sugar Ray's 1459 and Tony Bennett's MTV Unplugged. In January 2006, the Strokes released First Impressions of Earth. We've got to establish three categories for the songs on this album. The first category is the classics. These are the songs that belong right next to Last Night and Reptilia, no questions asked. The album starts out very strong with You Only Live Once, which I'd say is the most famous song off FIOE. For good reason too. The chorus is one of the best the band has ever made, and the production nails a good balance between their old and new sound. I also want to mention two related songs. First is the pared down demo version, I'll Try Anything Once. It has slightly different lyrics, but the production is just Julian and a keyboard. It's a really touching song. You might know it best from the film Somewhere and its trailer. The second is YOLO's B-side, a cover of Mercy Mercy Me with Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam. Insanely cool collab. Razorblade is the closest this album gets to a classically written Strokes song. Throw this one through some Jekyll and Hyde pedals and it'd be one of the best unreleased Strokes tracks ever. You want to know how good Electricity Scape is? The last thing Julian says before the chorus is "You belong on the radio," and then lets the guitar rip out a hook so good that it doesn't even need lyrics. The second category is the mixed bags. I, or other people, may have hang-ups with them, but if you told me one of these was your favorite Strokes songs, I'd have no problem with it. Lead single Juicebox was severely disliked when it came out. It also sold me on the Strokes. That's right, this whole time you've been listening to a stupid idiot. Yeah, so if Reptilia was my first taste, and Is This It made me fall in love, then Juicebox was the song that made me realize there could be something special here. I know, I'm sorry. Now, does it sound like a B-list spy movie theme with lyrics written by a pickup artist? Yeah, a little bit. Plus, the overall package can feel disjointed, as if there's 3 different songs stacked on top of each other. But that bass line, especially in the choruses, always gets me hyped up. And the outro with Julian yelling, I can't help but love it. It's also, get this, their only hit song according to the Billboard Hot 100, clocking in at number 98. And on the topic of songs that feel like 3 different songs, Vision of Division, anyone? Again, it's disjointed as heck, but I like each individual piece enough to enjoy the whole. Ask Me Anything is a fine ballad, but it feels to me like they wanted to put I'll Try Anything Once on here, but couldn't, so they just mildly rewrote it. Man, it would have been cool if they put I'll Try Anything Once on here instead. Make it the halfway point and it could have created a cool delineation between side 1 and side 2. In its favor though, Ask Me Anything does have the best Strokes lyric of all time.
Don't be a coconut.
Sorry, I'll just be leaving now. The third and final category is the You're free to like these songs because you're an independent creature with your own opinion. However, I will be filing a restraining order against all of them. On the other side, no, absolutely not. It's lazy, it's tired, it belongs in the dungeon. 15 Minutes is the kind of song that I like in theory. Maybe it's the Queen still lingering in my brain, but I think a multi-part Stroke song could work really well. It just isn't this. But what about the sound? What about that modern production that the gang was aiming for? Well, FIOE definitely sounds modern, but in the way that Crystal Pepsi was modern. In their chase to sound massive, the Strokes end up sounding bloated. Everything sounds so heavy. The best example in my view is how Julian sounds. Let me first make clear, Julian is not only a great vocalist for the Strokes, he's also the only one. I cannot imagine anyone else bringing in that rugged yet open-hearted demeanor like he does. But for the love of God, not like this. It's a perfect storm of removing all the distortion from his voice, plus compressing it to high heaven. The result is that he sounds gross, especially when he's yelling.
Why do I accept the things
It's not like that.
you say?
Even with the questionable production though, there's still some good to amazing stuff on FIOE. It just takes more digging to find it. Honestly, you slice 3 to 5 songs off of this and sure, it wouldn't stand up to the past 2 albums, but I think it would have been seen in a better light. First Impressions of Earth was a wee bit of a disappointment upon its release, both to fans and critics. As far as sales go, FIOE ended up selling half of what Room on Fire sold, which, I'll remind you, was less than half of what Is This It sold. And while the Strokes spoke highly of the recording process for the album at first, future interviews would reveal just how frustrating the sessions really were. Everybody's sad! Once the tour for FIOE wrapped, the Strokes took a very intentional break. This allowed each member to tackle proper solo projects for the first time. Albert released 2 solo albums, Yours to Keep in October 2006 and Como Te Llama in July 2008. I've always had a soft spot for Hard to Live in the City off the former. Fab formed a new band called Little Joy and they released a debut album in November 2008. This is a really nice record, a lo-fi indie pop collab between him, Rodrigo Amarante, and Binky Shapiro. It's a low-stakes project but all around enjoyable. And while we're talking about one-off projects, Nikolai started a band called Nickel Eye and released The Time of Assassins in January 2009. Pretty in line with the Strokes songwriting, though the sound is less Lou Reed and more The Kinks. Julian was the most visibly busy during this time away. He provided backing vocals for Queens of the Stone Age's 666. He was part of My Drive-Thru, a Converse single with NERD and Santigold. Do you remember this? It was part of a yearly series that Converse did, getting 3 different artists to collab. It gave us that one phenomenal track by Gorillaz, James Murphy, and Andre 3000 back in 2012. It also gave us a song with Andrew WK, Matt and Kim, and Soulja Boy. His own solo album, Phrases for the Young, dropped in November 2009. It combines a more synth-friendly production style with just the most depressing lyrics. Oh, and he also did this.
Everyone was wearing fingerless gloves.
The only member who didn't put out solo work was Nick. He actually publicly voiced his aversion to bandmates putting out solo material, but he did do some session work for Devendra Banhart and Sia. The band reconvened in 2009, initially with producer Joe Ciccarelli in tow. However, just one song from those sessions made the final cut, and the rest were retooled with Gus Oberg. Julian started out by sitting many of these sessions out while he was wrapping up commitments for phrases, but ultimately recorded his vocals remotely, away from everyone else. He stated that this was intentional to give the other guys the space to come up with ideas, but the other guys, Nick specifically, said it gave the sessions a disjointed and stressful feel. In March 2011, Angles was released. Alright, let's see what we got here. Weird dissonant post-punk on You're So Right? Okay. 80s new wave on Games? Okay. A straight-up Muse song on Metabolism? Okay. A guitar-heavy ballad with no drums and a really pretty music video with Call Me Back? Okay. My first impression of Angles was a feeling of musical whiplash, and that impression stuck with me long after the album came out. For this re-listen, I expected Angles to still feel like that same whiplash-inducing ride, but it's actually held up well. Now, I admit my bias, Angles was the first record I heard after properly getting on the Strokes Express. Still though, the band's first step into an 80s-inspired power pop version of themselves works more than it doesn't. I adore the opener Machu Picchu. First off, the song is in E-flat minor. What songs are in E-flat minor? The section after the second chorus, I think I've listened to this one section hundreds of times. I love how the band layers in more and more, topped off with Julian busting out the falsetto. Under Cover of Darkness functions both as a catchy single and a soothing reminder that On the Other Side can't hurt you anymore. So does Taken for a Fool. I've always loved the way the guitars duet with each other on the pre-chorus, plus that high pedal tone on the verses. Games took a while to click with me,
James, as we like to call it. James with a G.
but what sold me was Julian's vocals on the outro. The pain in his voice is so apparent. There aren't many other Stroke songs with that level of transparency. And now let me be transparent, I do not understand why Gratisfaction is not a bigger deal. Easily the most fun song on Angles, and my pick for most underrated Stroke song ever. And Life is Simple in the Moonlight is just a really sweet, no-frills track. It's the only song from the Joe Ciccarelli sessions to appear on here. Here's a fun gaming comparison for you. Super Mario 3D World, anyone? That game was thought of as good when it came out, but it was seen as lesser because of the circumstances of its release and what it potentially represented for the series' future. However, with a few years of distance and a few games that changed trajectory, it's much easier to appreciate this game now for what it is. In that same way, now that we have over a decade of distance between us and Angles, I feel very old all of a sudden. Angles got a mixed reaction in 2011, and it certainly didn't help that the band was pretty open about how not fun the recording process was. I remember reading a Spin cover story on the band around when this album came out, and man was it depressing. It gave the impression that the band had lost their step, but had made up for it by hating what they were doing. Julian, why do you keep putting finger guns up to your head? What are you trying to tell us? What are you doing? You straight up killed Fab. This guy's a monster. Following a tour that included a top spot at Coachella, the band took another break. It was during this hiatus when we got one of the most important songs ever made by any Strokes member. This random jingle by Julian for a perfume brand. I unironically love this song, but I can't listen to it because the full version never released. Where's the full version, Julian? I've been waiting since 2011 and I still don't. Aside from that, things were quiet until January 2013, when we got a new song called One Way Trigger. I remember this one being fairly divisive, and I get why. It felt like the Strokes burrowing even further into the synth stuff from Angles, and I'm still not sure if its hook is good or if I'm just blinded by fanboyism. Just over 2 months after One Way Trigger, the Strokes released Come Down Machine in March 2013. You like this music video I'm playing right now? It's cool, isn't it? Just get ready for this next music video they released. The band decided to do virtually nothing to promote this one. There were 2 singles, 1 music video of past tour footage, some light promo art, a lyric sheet, and that was it. It would also take a while before any of these songs were played live. Any clips I play were recorded at least a year later. Plus, look at the cover. It's made to look like an old RCA magnetic tape container. Apparently this was intentional, harkening back to vintage records. On its own, that's pretty cool. Combined with the media blackout, it reads as a throwaway decision for an album meant to get them out of their record deal. Everything about this album's release felt like an afterthought. Why is this their best album since Room on Fire? Somehow, by stripping back a lot of the processing from FIOE and angles, the Strokes demonstrate how tight they had become as a unit. In some instances, the stripping back reveals these boys got groove. That groove can work wonders on songs like the opener Tap Out, which shows that Albert and Nick are two of the most in-sync guitarists of the modern age. If you had played 80s Come Down Machine for me back in 2004, I would have eaten my Juicebox video player out of shock. It's not my favorite ballad on the album, but it's still lovely. Plus it's got Nick on a Mellotron. Ooh! But the back half of Come Down Machine? Oh, this is that real good. Slow Animals is another example of the band's new emphasis on groove, with Julian singing from the perspective of a worried father. Also worth highlighting is the B-side Fast Animals, which is just the band playing Slow Animals at a faster tempo. And then there's Extremely Fast Animals, which is basically the Strokes, but Nightcore. Partners in Crime gives me the same American Girl vibes as Last Night, with some fun touches like how the guitars leap up to form a harmony with Julian on the chorus. In the battle of synth ballads, Chances takes my personal cake over the title track. That chorus is a musical wrecking ball. Happy ending? The build up to the last chorus. How are you not listening to this song right now? And the closer, Call It Fate, Call It Karma? I'm sorry, who let Little Joy back into the studio? What a far out closer for a Strokes album, but I like it. Probably Julian's best falsetto on the record. Honestly, the songs on here that don't land for me as much are the ones in line with the Strokes' normal sound, like All the Time and 50/50, but I don't hate them or anything. In total, Come Down Machine is, against all odds, the Strokes' best album since Room on Fire. And don't tell anyone I told you this, but sometimes, when I'm in my sick bastard mode, I think this is their best album since Is This It? But I was alone in my sick bastardness, and Come Down Machine carried this new trend of mixed reactions for the Strokes. And since there was no additional media and no tour, the Strokes' machine quickly came down. The rest of 2013 saw a new EP by Albert, Julian on a Daft Punk song, and Nick Valenci forming his own side band called CRX, though they wouldn't release a record for a few more years. 2014 saw the release of Tyranny, the debut album by Julian Casablancas and The Voids. Are we in for another synth-heavy album like Phrases? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you not put on your 2014 bingo card Julian and his new band doing aggressive political noise rock with titles like Nintendo Blood and Johann von Bronx? It's okay, because I didn't either. Tyranny is a record that I don't listen to much, then I think fondly of it, and then I go to listen to it and I remember, oh, it's just okay. But it is the first real instance of Julian weaving in overt political themes into his music, something that will feed into the Strokes' future albums. It also has Julian ending a song with this.
Good job, business dog.
I take it back, the album is good. If you're interested, check out the apocalyptic prom dance song known as Human Sadness. Finally, Albert released another solo record in July 2015. Teases for a new Strokes project started ramping up in 2015, as this would be their first not under RCA. Instead, the band linked up with Julian's own label, Cult Records. They properly returned in June 2016 with their first EP since the modern age, Future, Present, Past. Each of the 3 tracks are meant to represent a different era of the band. Their future, their present, and their past. Their future sounded like Drag Queen, and it's a weird time. Julian's pitch shifted, Fab's drums sound like trash cans, and the guitars sound more like the strangest preset on your nearest keyboard. Hey, is there a typo here? Ah, there we go. In hindsight, Drag Queen was more a forebearer of Julian's solo work rather than the next evolution of the Strokes. Still, it's an interesting experiment. Their present sounded like Oblivious. I love this song. That same subdued groovy spirit from Tap Out makes a reappearance, and Julian is right in his critical political lyrical era. If you like anything from Come Down Machine, this will be right up your alley. And their past sounded like Threat of Joy. Was this proof that the Strokes could write Turns Out That Wasn't It, but this is actually it this time if they wanted to? Kinda. It sounds and feels like a cleaned up old school Strokes song. I'm not in love with it, but I also have no issue with it whatsoever. Oh yeah, and there's an Oblivious remix by Fab. Future, Present, Past is a good time. I remember being slightly underwhelmed by it just being an EP, but looking back, this was a good way for the band to test the cobwebs and shake off the waters. The Strokes continued to tour throughout 2016 and early 2017. It was during this tour when the band started on a new, full-length project, though it would not see the light of day anytime soon. Nick's band CRX released their debut album in October 2016. I've always been fond of the song Broken Bones. 2018 saw the release of Virtue, the second album by the rebranded Voids, and a new Albert record. That Albert record is fine, but oh, that Voids album is so good. It's way more diverse than Tyranny, and it's held up very well in the 4 years since it dropped. Please, if you remotely enjoy the Strokes and have not heard this, give it a listen. And finally, Fab started another band/artist collective, Machine Gum. Their debut album dropped in late 2019. Imagine the Strokes fused with the 1975, and you're in the ballpark of what this sounds like. It was also in 2019 when the Strokes started playing shows and debuting new material. And from how the band were talking, they seemed really rejuvenated. They were poised to dominate music in 2020. Nothing could ruin this timing for the band that put out an album on 9/11. The new Abnormal arrived in April 2020. And also this new Strokes album. Yep, they could not have picked a more perfect title for an album dropping alongside the COVID-19 pandemic. The producer this time is Rick Rubin. Now, when I first heard that news, I was feeling a little bit about it, like just a little bit. But I was soon reminded of how many people call him a reducer and not a producer, and I thought maybe his inclusion would see the Strokes scaled down to their most effective essentials. And you know what? That's what happened. The new Abnormal is the Strokes' best album in over a decade, and I don't even have to activate my sick bastard mode to say it. The Adults Are Talking, or as the YouTube search bar calls it, The Adulterers Are Talking, is a phenomenal way to kick things off. The dueling guitars, the tight drum machine, the effortless falsetto towards the end. It's also in F major. You know what other album opener was in F major? Huh? You feel me? Bad Decisions is the last night of this album. Is it very reminiscent of I Melt With You and Dancing With Myself? Yeah, I love it for that, and I love that for it. You can't help but sing along by the end, and the way that Julian rips out that yeah at the end, just perfect. Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus is one of the more synth-heavy tracks, but the synths blend really well with the distorted guitar hook. Also, can we just acknowledge the chorus where Julian yells,
I want new friends, but that I want me.
Gone are the days of Julian lying to get to some girl's apartment. Here are the days where his friends make plans without him knowing. Y'all, how was the lead single for this album At the Door? Who was responsible for that? No percussion and guitar chords that sound like synths, specifically the synths from Usher's DJ Got Us Falling in Love Again.
Kid in a street bed.
So we back in the club with the bodies rocking from.
I can't get over how much I respect The Unexpected Turn. And Ode to the
guy's
Mets is the best Strokes album closer since I Can't Win, largely because it sums up this second phase of the Strokes. It's an affirming dedication to loving something that may disappoint you, but always comes back to give it another try. I said something like this back in 2020, but here's my take on it again. The new Abnormal is the Strokes truly moving past the burden of their early hype and into a stronger, more confident entity. It's great.
Okay, it's coming to an end. Wow.
The new Abnormal was quite well received during Our New Abnormal. Great reviews, and it even got the band their first ever Grammy. Of course, with COVID going around, the Strokes were unable to promote it much. They were stuck to music videos and Zoom shows. But ever since live music returned, the Strokes have been doing a ton of shows. I was actually planning on seeing them at this year's Primavera Sound, but they had to cancel due to a positive COVID case. That's okay, my date and I had plenty of fun regardless. As for a new album, the band have basically said, yeah! The only new song we've gotten recently was Starting Over, which was used as part of the campaign for NYC mayoral candidate Maya Wiley. It was also co-written by the guy from the New Radicals. Whatever is going on there, I want more of it, please. If you want to get into the Strokes, is this it? That's where you start. No doubt about it. After that, I most enjoyed Room on Fire, Come Down Machine, and The New Abnormal, but I think you're in for a good time no matter what record you start with. Except for First Impressions of Earth. Just don't start with that one. That's all I'll say. And if you have a favorite Strokes song, album, related thing, I would love to know what it is in the comments.
Whew, wow. Wow, this guy sounds like a music nerd. Yeah, that was a long one. I think about it, it's actually not that long because he just like puts the entire history of this band he just fixed all of it into 33 minutes, and it's actually not that long. It's not that, as long as it sounded like it would be. But yeah, this was nice. He's really good. He's funny, and the way he talked about the band, the whole album, the things that happened before the album came out, and all of that, it was really nice. It was really nice and very informative. Before now, I didn't know anything about, you know, the Strokes. I've only heard one of their songs, which was Last Night. If you guys haven't seen it yet, then it's probably still blocked because it's blocked for now. The album is this. It sounds like a really good album, and I should really start with that because from what I've seen and learned here, they're very good one. And I'm actually quite surprised that they're still together. You know, when you see these bands playing so good, doing so well together after a short period of time, you hear things like, oh, they're separated, they went on their different ways. Yeah, they took some breaks to, you know, do other things, but then they came back and they're still together, and that's impressive. This was nice. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much, guys, for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed the video as well. If you did, do not hesitate to give me a big fat thumbs up. Consider hitting that subscribe button as well. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Until then, stay safe, be kind, and bye.